In the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1944, a dozen men held the fate of Hitler's fortress Europe in their hands. They were field marshals and generals, the architects of the Atlantic Wall, the commanders tasked with throwing the largest amphibious invasion in history back into the sea. They were veterans of Poland, France, and the brutal Eastern Front. But as the Normandy coast erupted in fire and steel, their carefully laid plans, their careers, and for many, their very lives, began to unravel. Within a year, their world would be ash. So, what actually happened to Hitler's D-Day generals? Their fates were as varied and as brutal as the war itself. The first to fall was General Wilhelm Falley. As commander of the 91st Infantry Division, stationed right behind Utah Beach, Falley was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Racing towards his headquarters near Pickaville in the early hours of D-Day, his staff car drove straight into an ambush set by American paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne. A burst of machine gun fire ended his life before the sun had even risen on the invasion. He was the first German general killed in the Normandy campaign, a stark omen for the chaos to come. Just 6 days later, another key commander met his end. General Erich Marcks, a hardened veteran who had lost a leg in Russia, was the commander of the 84th Corps, defending the coastline from the Orne River to Mont Saint-Michel, including Omaha Beach. On June 12, while on a tour of the front, his command car was strafed by an Allied fighter bomber. A 20mm cannon shell tore into his groin, severing his femoral artery. He bled to death in a ditch by the side of a French country road. By the end of the month, the 7th Army, which bore the brunt of the American assault, was on the verge of collapse. Its commander, General Friedrich Dollmann, was a man under immense pressure. On June 28, with the strategic port of Cherbourg about to fall, Dollmann died. The official report claimed a heart attack, brought on by the stress of the collapsing front. But whispers have persisted for decades. Was it suicide, a self-inflicted gunshot, or a dose of poison to escape the Führer's inevitable wrath for losing a city Hitler had declared a fortress? We may never know for sure, but his death marked the end of the first phase of the German defense. But the most famous name in Normandy was, of course, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. As commander of Army Group B, he was in charge of the immediate coastal defense. By a twist of fate, he was in Germany for his wife's birthday on June 6, convinced the weather was too poor for an invasion. He rushed back to the front, but quickly realized the battle was lost without control of the air. On July 17, his car was also strafed by an Allied plane. He suffered a massive skull fracture and was sent home to recover. But a far greater danger was waiting for him there. 3 days later, on July 20th, a bomb exploded in Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters. Rommel, though not a direct conspirator, knew of the plot to kill the Führer and had contacts with the resistance. His name came up during the Gestapo's brutal interrogations. On October 14th, 2 generals arrived at his home. They gave him a choice: face a public trial for treason, which would mean the ruin and persecution of his family, or take a cyanide capsule. Rommel chose the poison. He was given a state funeral with full military honors, the official cause of death listed as complications from his battle wounds. The regime he served had murdered its most celebrated soldier. Rommel's chief of staff, General Hans Speidel, was a central figure in the anti-Hitler conspiracy. Unlike his boss, Speidel was a master of survival. He was arrested by the Gestapo, interrogated for months but never broke. He implicated no one and managed to talk his way through the accusations. As the Allied armies closed in, he was shuffled between prisons. In April 1945, during a transfer, he and other prisoners were liberated by American troops. Speidel not only survived the war, he thrived in its aftermath, becoming a key architect of the new West German Army, the Bundeswehr, and eventually serving as NATO's commander of land forces in Central Europe. Rommel's superior, the aristocratic Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, was the overall commander-in-chief West. An old-school Prussian, he was deeply pessimistic about Germany's chances. After the failure to contain the beachhead, he famously told Hitler's headquarters to make peace, "you fools." He was promptly dismissed, but reinstated later. Captured by the Americans in May 1945, he was charged with war crimes but was ultimately released due to his age and poor health. He died in 1953, a relic of a bygone military tradition. The panzer specialist, General Leogayer von Schweppenberg, commander of Panzer Group West, saw his headquarters obliterated by an RAF air raid, which wounded him and killed most of his staff. He was another commander sacked by Hitler for suggesting a strategic withdrawal. He too was captured, and after the war, he followed a similar path to Speidel, helping to establish the new German military. The others faced a mix of fates. General Hans von Salmuth, whose 15th Army was held in reserve to guard against a phantom second invasion at Pas-de-Calais, was eventually captured. He was tried for war crimes, sentenced to 20 years, but was released after just 7. General Max Pemsel, Dollmann's chief of staff, surrendered to the Americans and also joined the post-war Bundeswehr. General Alfred Schlemm, commander of the paratroopers, was transferred to Italy and fought there until he was captured by the British. The story wasn't confined to the army. Field Marshal Hugo Spurly, the corpulent commander of the German Air Force in France, watched his Luftwaffe get swept from the skies. He was captured, tried at the High Command trial in Nuremberg but was acquitted on all counts. He died a free man in 1953. Finally, there was Admiral Theodor Kranke, commander of the German Navy in the West. With only a handful of destroyers and torpedo boats to face the might of the Allied navies, his role was a hopeless one. He was captured, held as a prisoner of war until 1947 and then quietly retired. So there they are. A dozen men at the heart of the storm. 3 killed in action within the first month. 1 forced into suicide by his own leader. 1 arrested for treason who miraculously survived to build a new army. The rest, sacked, captured, imprisoned. Their stories are a microcosm of the Third Reich's downfall. A story of battlefield attrition, but also of internal rot. Of a high command paralyzed by a fanatical leader, and of a regime that devoured its own. They stood on the cliffs of Normandy in June 1944 as the masters of Western Europe. Within a year, they were all gone. Dead, disgraced, or defeated. They were the generals of D-Day, and their collective fate was to preside over the beginning of the end.